We'll bring JC back to order. And so the next topic of a discussion today is presentation of the OAH budget. And so we have Director Demers. Correct, sir. And so welcome, and who have you got with you? And we'll go ahead and we're ready for your presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. And with me is our Office Manager, Janet Rutlinger. So in terms of our budget, overall, there's a decrease of approximately $40,000 from the prior biennium in terms of the request in the amount of $4,119,000. The OAH is the Office of Administrative Hearings. We do administrative hearings for state agencies primarily. In addition to that, we do teacher termination cases for school districts. We're required to do hearings for workers' compensation, for driver's licenses, for Department of Family Services, abuse and neglect cases, teacher termination cases, and then employee discipline cases with the state. And in terms of all the other cases, it's at the request of the agency that we provide the services. Things have generally,
just on that point, we're having this, Representative Schwartz and I are having this discussion at noon. When the at the equal employment at the Employment Commission, I mean, they have their hearing process, but eventually does that, once they get to kind of their administrative process, does that eventually end up in front of you before it heads off to trial?
Generally, Mr. Chairman, yes. So labor standards, they make their initial decision, and then if the individual requests a hearing, it would come over to the Office of Administrative Hearings for a decision.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And in terms of our funding, there are no general funds. We're funded 45% by Wyoming Department of Transportation, and then 55% by workers' compensation, or Department of Workforce Services, but from the Workers' Compensation Fund. And then in terms of providing services for other agencies, as they utilize our office, we bill them for those services. And then that money goes back to either YDOT or, well, it's actually a reduction in the payment that we would obtain from YDOT or Workforce Services.
And how often do you true that up?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman?
How often do you true that up when you've got that, but then you've got this other source that comes in that you can't, it's kind of indeterminate. So does you true that up once a year at the end of the biennium?
Is it on a monthly basis? Yes.
Okay, monthly. All right, thank you.
Thank you. We have currently 5 full-time hearing examiners, counting myself. We're seeking to hire another one, which should happen in the near future. We recently had one hearing examiner leave. And then we have 5 full-time support staff. We're authorized to hire contract hearing examiners as well. Currently, we have 2 contract hearing examiners. We're seeking to increase that. And then one of the contract hearing examiners currently is going to be leaving at the end of December. So she will also have to be replaced.
You can pull your mic just a little bit closer, please, Director.
I apologize.
There you go.
That sounds much better. Thank you.
Much better.
In terms of replacing the contract hearing examiners, we had 4 within the last couple of years, and now we're down to 2. And before that, they had 5. So that's one of the unknowns for us at this time is how much it's going to cost us to obtain those contract services, because the hearing examiners who had been with us had been there for a substantial period of time. That's just something that remains to be seen as to what the market's going to require in terms of replacing those services.
Go ahead.
What's your starting wage for a full-time hearing officer?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, each of them have been starting at approximately 96,000 and change. And that's basically the max on the classification. And I think it's important that I think that that's appropriate. Currently, we're fortunate to have very experienced hearing examiners. I think the average level of legal experience in the office is probably over 25 years. So at least, and I think it's very important in terms of the services that we provide, that we have a mature hearing examiners and hearing examiners who've experienced a lot in terms of both life and legal predicaments. So I feel very good about the staff that we currently have in terms of their experience and also their dedication to their work.
And so just going back, so you've got how many vacancies now?
Currently, we have one full-time vacancy.
One full-time vacancy, and then just if you can clear it up for me, the contract hearing examiners that you're having, is that because you have that vacancy, or is that just because you've got additional workload that can't be satisfied by the staff that you have?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's because of the additional workload that can't be satisfied. And traditionally, they were dispersed throughout the state, which made it easier to do more in-person hearings. Since I've been there, I didn't start the job until COVID, so I haven't had that experience.
It's not even new normal, it's just normal. It's just the normal for you.
Yes, so we've been doing a lot of remote hearings, and I think people are adjusting to that. So the extent to which they need to be dispersed around the state is another question, but I think at this time that it would still be helpful to have them dispersed around the state and be able to do more in-person hearings.
And when you have the contract hearing examiners, is that at an hourly rate, or do you have a fixed rate where they get so much depending on how do you do that?
So currently, the two contract hearing examiners that we have, it's at a fixed rate. And then that's one of the questions with trying to fill the positions, because it's difficult to try to fit it into the RFP process. Because as a small agency with a limited budget, I would like to keep it at a fixed rate because it gives us a lot more predictability. And I know, for example, the Medical Commission for the Workers' Compensation Division, they do a lot of hourly rates with the hearing examiners, but they're a much larger budget and they can absorb fluctuations more so than we can. So my preference would be to keep it at a fixed rate.
And when you do that, are you contracting them for approximately quarter time, half time, full time?
I would say approximately half time. Now, another issue that we have is traditionally hearings were sent to the contract hearing examiners for workers' compensation by the county. So, for example, a hearing examiner out in the western part of the state would get 4 or 5 counties. That's something that I'm going to be looking to change with the new contract hearing examiners, because just the rules of probability, sometimes you would have real lulls in certain parts of the state, and that wasn't helpful to us. So it would be much more beneficial to us if we can just send cases as the workload dictates.
I mean, you'd really like to get services for the money that you pay? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, got it.
Sure. So,
it's good work if you can get it, huh? All right.
thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my questions are more about the revenue stream. When you look at it, it's 55% DWS, 45% YDOT. When you look at the number of cases, it's flipped almost. It's even more. So my assumption is the complexity of the DWS cases are higher. And then the second part would be then, so are most of the drivers, the whiteout ones, driver license revocation cases?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz. Yes, the DWS cases, when they go to hearing and when they don't settle, generally, yes, they're more complex. And it takes a lot more time to write the decisions than the driver's license cases do. The only driver's license cases that we do are revocation cases. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Keep going, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I've hit the highlights of what I would like to address this afternoon, but I'm certainly open to any questions.
Okay, thank you. And there, going through, no exception request, just the standard budget.
No exception requests, correct?
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the Department of Administrative
Mr.
Hearings?
Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative Walters.
Mr. Chairman, for my own edification, in statute, does an agency have to spell out that if there's an issue that someone wants to challenge a ruling within that agency, it has to go through OAH, or can it go straight to court? And really where I derive this question is the Gaming Commission did not spell out that you had to use the administrative procedures and come through your office. And so there was some denials of applicants for various games. And they took it to court. And then last year, the legislature tried to say, put in there that it has to go through your office first. Any other agencies like that where it's required to, it's not spelled out that it needs to go there, but it by default should go through your office before court? Trying to understand the process better is really the gist of the question.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Walters. So generally speaking, the way that it works is under the Administrative Procedures Act, any agency action or inaction, an individual can request a hearing if they're adversely aggrieved or materially harmed. And they can ask, but some agencies, it depends on their rules as to whether or not a hearing is required in some instances. And except for the agencies that are required to go through our office, again, workers' compensation, driver's licenses, family service for abuse and neglect, teacher terminations, and employee discipline, the agencies can hold their own hearing. A lot do choose to utilize our services. But whether or not they can have they're entitled to a hearing for a specific alleged wrong is dependent on statute and rules and regulations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I just
Mr.
want to say,
Co-Chair.
that's a good looking tie you got on.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman.
You can't comment on fashion.
Actually.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Representative
Chairman,
Short.
Are you referring, can I comment on fashion?
We'll give you some latitude.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not going, I can't really see the tie. Is it your tie, Bob? Anyhow, back to revenues, and we discussed this in the hall, that currently you've been, because you want a more stable revenue stream, you have taken the two agencies with the highest number of cases. And then employee discipline cases, historically, I'm assuming have been spread through many, many agencies. But with the consolidation of HR, I'm assuming there's a likelihood many of them will actually now come through A&I. So given that, would it make sense to put A&I in as a third agency in the proportional distribution? And Mr. Hibbert is already shaking his head. So maybe I'll direct this question to him.
Whoever's most qualified to answer that, please launch it.
Mr. Chairman, I've been involved in this in some fashion for almost 30 years. And really to stabilize this is the way that we've got it with workforce services and with YDOT. And then all the other agencies, you might have 5 years before you'll actually have a hearing event. And that's why they true it up on a monthly basis and then bill directly to that. Now, A&I will be doing the human resources for everybody, but in this case, when that's handed off, then the Office of Administrative Hearings will see to that agency's picked up on a bill, and it might be special revenue, it might be federal funds or some other combination of that, or even general funds. But that's the process that we've established for a very long time, and it seems to be healthy, and YDOT participates well, and so does workforce services.
So the anticipation is that there's no change. It's regardless of where the HR office is distributed, it'll go back to the employee from which the issue or where the dispute arose.
Absolutely. The
Okay.
Office of Administration Hearings sees to that billing is trued up. And then YDOT doesn't get overbilled, and neither does workforce service.
And so in my understanding, or the way it used to be, I believe it still is, the personnel rules govern issues involving personnel. And that typically requires a mediation or an arbitration. So where you pick two sides, you pick two parties and then a third party, and you have hearings in front of those arbitrations. So it's kind of a different process.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. They've changed it now, so,
Have they? Yeah.
so it does go to the OAH, and then the hearing officer makes the final decision on the disciplinary matter.
That's the olden days.
Yeah.
Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question about the bill back to the agency. I probably misunderstood this, but let's imagine that I'm the director of an agency and I'm a particularly obstreperous person to work with. And so I just arbitrarily and capriciously terminate people for no reason. So I generate a lot of wrongful termination cases that go to your agency. Does my agency get billed for that at all? Or does that get taken care of by YDOT and Workforce Services?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith. So what would happen is your agency at the conclusion of the hearing would be billed by the Office of Administrative Hearings. And then that would reduce for that month the payments that we got from Workforce Services or WIDOT.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Other questions? We haven't stumped the director yet. Okay, I guess you're going to get off the hook with this, I think.
Nice tie, did I tell you that?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, and thank your Ty, and thank your team for showing up today.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
if I
Don,
might comment on some housekeeping items, well, we'll go as a brief pause here.
please do.
The Ms. Wilkinson has been advised we're running a little bit ahead, so anticipate her arriving shortly.
And she's with whom?
She is with the Law Examiners Board, and that is
Okay.
Agency 102. For those of you who are using the hard copies, that is embedded in Agency 101 in the second tab. For those of you who are using the electronic copy, it is also embedded in the 101 PDF. If I might continue, this afternoon, we were able to include the Attorney General. So she'll be joining us after the Law Examiners Board. And I know that they're listening in and are prepared to attend as early as 3:30 p.m. today.
They understand stack cases.
In addition, just to preview tomorrow, the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice was out of town today, so unable to move. And then followed by the district courts will consume much of the morning. I believe they also have some commentary on the ARP Act funding that they will be describing at this time as well. They don't have many exception requests, but they wanted some time to discuss those federal funds. Then we'll close out the morning with the Commission on Judicial Conduct and Ethics. Then we were able to move District Attorney number 1, Ms. Manlove, from here in Laramie County, and she will be with us before the committee at 1 p.m., followed by the prosecuting attorneys, and that's Mr. Joe Barron from Crook County. I believe he will be Zooming in, will not be with us in person. Unfortunately, we were not able to get Mr. Ensign. He will still be, he's the district attorney in Natrona County. He will still, he had other obligations and was not able to move his schedule around. So he'll be, I believe, scheduled for next Monday.
That's a schedule until it changes.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, which does mean that you likely will have a early adjournment tomorrow, or perhaps around 2 or so.
Okay, thank you.
We ought to warn this Chief Justice that we have an extra hour to grill her.
Yeah,
We abhor a vacuum. We can fill it with questions, I'm sure.
we've You ready? All right. We'll go ahead and come back to order, and for our next matter is our good friends from the Board of Law Examiners. So Dr. Wilson, welcome. Glad to have you.
I am the Executive Director of the Wyoming State Bar. And in that capacity, I also serve as the Executive Secretary to the Wyoming Board of Law Examiners. So we are and with me here today is Kathy Dunsel. Kathy is the Admissions Director for the Wyoming State Bar. So Kathy administers the bar exam twice a year and also takes care of all the character and fitness, takes the lead on the character and fitness screenings. And we all staff the State Board of Education or State Board of Law Examiners and the Character and Fitness Committee. So we are before you today just requesting spending authority. This is our typical budget request, requesting spending authority of just over $240,000 that's in the special revenue account. As you know, applicants that want to apply to be admitted in Wyoming pay the $600 fee to the Wyoming Supreme Court, and that's what is the makeup of the money in that special revenue account. So I know that you have read the information in the budget request narrative, so I won't bore you with those details that you already know, but I'm sure happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions? Go ahead, Representative Walters.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. For the bar exam, you charge the folks taking it. And does that money then go into this account, or does
That's
it go
correct.
to the bar association?
All applicants for admission pay the Wyoming Supreme Court $600, and the court keeps a portion of that fee, but the rest of those fees go into that special revenue account. And that's the money that we use to administer the bar exam, the staffing. A portion of the staff salary is reimbursed from that, and just the exams themselves, any supplies that we need for the exam, the facility where we give the exam, that all comes out of that special revenue account.
And then, so you have bar examiners who are various lawyers that have been approved and volunteered to do that. Are they paid? Do they get a stipend? Do they get, how are they compensated at all, or just per diem and expense?
They are just reimbursed just like state employees do. They get their per diem. But no, they are not paid. They get reimbursed for their expenses.
And is there any issue with, do you have, I know a couple of them that have served and they enjoyed it and they've been good, but how the quality of the examiners that you get that belly up to the bar and offer their services, or are you satisfied with those, or are you good candidates? And that doesn't seem to be a problem right now.
Mr. Chairman, we have a wonderful board. It's 6 lawyers that have volunteered their time. The Supreme Court removed the term limits for that board because we have found that they do find that work quite satisfying, and they do want, it used to be you could only serve 2 3-year terms, and after 6 years you had to go off. But we did get a rule change from the Supreme Court, and now there are no term limits, and we've had members serving on there for well over 6 years, and they really enjoy it. It's hard work, but they really do enjoy it, and they're very good quality lawyers.
And is the bar exam still being offered just once a year, twice a year, or is it?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's offered twice a year, unless it was last year during the pandemic. We did have to offer a 3rd exam just because the July exam in 2020, the applicants, that was right smack in the middle of the pandemic. The applicants we're starting to hear some complaints from the applicants saying, please don't make us do this in person. They were demanding diploma privilege. And so we got together with the Board of Law Examiners and the Character and Fitness Committee, and ultimately the Wyoming Supreme Court, and determined that in addition to the February exam and the July exam, we added a September exam. And we only gave that exam to what, like 12? Like 12 applicants that took the 3rd exam. But that's the one and only time that any of us can remember that we offered a 3rd exam. So we're on track this year to go back to just the February and the July exams, and they will be in-person exams.
And so the exams that you administer now now you're administering the ethics exam, which gets administered. Is that part of the bar exam, or is that administered separately?
No, Mr. Chairman, Wyoming now administers what's called the uniform bar exam.
Mhm.
We implemented the uniform bar exam in 2013. We were I think the 11th state to administer that. Now there are 41 states that administer that exam. And so the portions of that exam are the MPRE, the
Multi-state.
the ME, the essay exam, the MBE, the multi-states bar exam, and then the MPT, which is the multi-state performance test. And so all those 3 things make up the uniform bar exam.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Sure, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first one, actually, you made a reference to the State Board of Education, and I didn't quite catch what you said. And the second, but we can do that second. But the first one, so there's the uniform bar exam, which is now 41 states. So if somebody has passed it in, oh, I don't know, Oregon, they are if they've passed in Oregon, they are automatically able to apply here and will be accepted barring lack of fitness or whatever.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I apologize for the reference to the Department of Education. I worked there 20 years ago and it still slips out. And
It's a Freudian
so,
slip.
so I apologize. Mr. Chairman, for the next question, yes, if you take the uniform bar exam, you have a 3-year window to transfer your score to another uniform, a UBE state. You have to pass the character and fitness screening in those states, but you have a 3-year window. So your score is portable for 3 years. Oh,
Well, you said 2, this will be 3.
This will be 3. I might
Okay, go ahead.
And what happens after 3 years?
After 3 years, Mr. Chairman, after 3 years, that score is no longer portable. And those UBE states, I would add that every UBE state sets its own, what's called a cut score or your passing score. So Wyoming's passing score is a 270, and the majority of the 41 states have that 270 passing score. The highest score I want to say is 280, and that's in Alaska, I think, and Alabama. Alabama and Oklahoma Alabama and a few other states have the lowest cut score, and that's a 260. So Wyoming's right there in the middle with the 270, but you set your own cut score.
Do we do admissions by petition with reciprocity and experience? How's that work?
Mr. Chairman, there are 3 ways you can get admitted to the bar. You can be admission by exam, sit for and pass the exam, admission by motion, which is what you're referring to. Admission by motion means if your rules match our rules, if you wouldn't make our lawyers sit for an exam in your state, we won't make yours. So it's kind of a reciprocity agreement, although we don't typically use that word anymore. Or you could transfer your UBE score. So those are the 3 ways that you could be admitted to practice law in Wyoming.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
I see you
Senator
brought your
Kinski.
lawyer along, so I'll try not to ask any questions that require legal advice. I should know the answer to this, but why do we no longer have a state law portion on the bar exam?
Mr. Chairman, we got rid of that when we implemented the uniform bar exam. The first couple of years that we had when we were starting out with the UBE, we did have a state specific requirement. It wasn't necessarily a portion on the exam, but we did have a state requirement. So all members that were licensed in their first year, you had to take what was called the Wyoming component, and just an educational course that was on some Wyoming specific issues. And I think we did away with that. Mark, do you remember, a couple of years after, like just 2 or 3 years after we implemented the uniform bar exam. We just didn't think it was necessary. A lot of states were doing the same thing and getting rid of theirs. We were paying attention to what was going on nationally. And we approached the Supreme Court looking at the attendance at those courses, their attention in those courses. They were all on their laptops checking email, and it was just, we decided it just wasn't a good use
It's like
of
being on the
anybody's
Senate floor. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Director Wilson. We're glad to have you, and thanks for
Thank
bringing
you.
your team. Mark, it's good to see you. You look well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Which agency are we reviewing next?
Representative Kinner,
It's
the next agency will be the Attorney General, Agency 15.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Representative Simpson.
Go ahead, we're back in session here. We got, so next on our agenda is Agency 15, the Attorney General. I'd like to welcome Attorney General Bridget Hill here today and your team. Well, welcome. Thank you for being flexible. So we appreciate that. And with that, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. We're happy to.
Bridget, I think you just pull that mic just a little bit closer.
Sorry.
Thank you. We actually have people attending, listening online. If we don't talk to the mics, they have no idea what's going on.
All right. How about that? Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we were happy to appear today and accommodate your schedule, especially when Don Richards indicated that meant I was going to get a little extra dose of patience and understanding for being a little less prepared
It
than
was
usual.
unauthorized to make those representations.
Yeah, I kind of assumed since he also said that it meant all my exception requests were approved.
What my preference is if you want, take us through, if there's any particular highlights you want, even for things, any departments or any units that you have that you want to make comment on, even if there's not an exception request. And of course, there's some other things we're all interested in. We'd like to hear any updates on any of the lawsuits that we've got out, in addition to what's going on there, just so we know, and we can take that back to our constituents as well as our colleagues.
Absolutely, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. So what I think I'll do then is go by exception request. I didn't necessarily have anything to add as I went through it of special areas of concern, but then if you have questions as I go along, I obviously would be happy to answer them. And then the final request from you, I'll handle at the end if that works.
That'll be fine. Thank you.
So of course, we're the Attorney General's office. We're providing legal services to the state and the officers. But as you are well aware, we have additional principal programs than the law office. So you hear Attorney General's office and maybe you think simply attorneys, and that's not so. We have what I would call 6 primary units. That's the law office. We have DCI, the Division of Criminal Investigations. We have the Law Enforcement Academy. We have Police Officer Standards and Training. We have the Division of Victim Services. And the 6th one is the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. And I just wanted to take a moment to note that I have brought all the directors of those units with me so they can answer questions, and I will introduce them as they come up with their unit, if that works for you, Mr. Chairman. So if we're going to go through our exception requests, I will start with our priorities. I'll go in the priority list that we have them. And the first ones will appear in the law office then. And that is law office is 101. The table for law office appears on page 26. And we do have 4 exception requests within the law office. So our total, I'll start with our total budget request is $21,188,625 for the law office. Our priorities, our exception requests in priority order. Our first priority is we have asked for $434,005 for the Colorado Compact legal support. As you all, I'm sure, are keenly aware, the Colorado River Basin is experiencing the worst drought it has experienced in over 100 years. And of course, this has led to the drawdown of various reservoirs in the basin. And it's led to a lot of consternation of folks wondering what we're going to do with these drought conditions. And through that, we're experiencing significantly increased legal work that will have to go, that we have experienced and will continue to experience for years as we try to implement the compact as it appears now, as it is existing now, get ready to renegotiate the compact, and then consider additional options that might be available for the states to look at as they try to deal with the historic draft. As you also know, probably from reading this, that we only have one attorney that works for the state engineer, dedicated to the state engineer. Occasionally, if we have excess capacity from the Water Development Office attorney, he will pick up some of the work for the engineer, but that's all of the state engineer's work, falls on one attorney. And because of this, go ahead.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Sure, go ahead, Mr.
So,
Co-Chair.
Bridget, I'm curious, because my recollection when I was in the AG's offices, there was 2.5 attorneys and at least one full-time was strictly on, did the compact work. So has that been around, not been around for a while?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that would be correct. Since I've been there and since I've been AG, I guess I would say, we are down to one dedicated to the state engineer, and then the second that does water development and with excess capacity state engineer. So one and a little less than a half.
Okay, that's just curious.
Yeah.
That was the olden days.
Yeah.
You know, we have lost various positions over time with budget cuts, and some of those have come from that division. In the very last round of budget cuts, we did lose an attorney in our water and natural.
So I just heard, Mr. Co-Chair, this week, that there was an agreement reached between Colorado, the lower states on the Colorado, that we weren't part of. And I'm just curious what that was.
You know, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I would have to check and see, since we weren't part of that. We're obviously an Upper Basin state. I can get in contact with my attorney that does that, and I don't know off the top of my head, and get you that information. You know, we are going to have to work through additional issues, legal issues related to the compact and how we deal with curtailment, if curtailment is involved, and the Upper Basin states, how they would, so we would work with the Upper Basin states to decide how we're going to do curtailment, if that's required, how we're going to do that consistently, and how we do that within the state of Wyoming. So there is a lot of legal work to be done there.
Thank you.
So our exception request then is made up of salary. So we price that out at a P4. We do need somebody with experience to help us with that. So we price that out at the P4 level. That's why you see the salary. And if it's okay, I'll just kind of round the numbers to whole numbers.
What I'd like to know is what starting wages are, what your P1, or what are those positions that they've been renamed since I was there, but how many positions do you have? It used to be attorney 1, attorney 2, and then a senior assistant. So can you tell us what those salaries are for those, or what you have?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. So the classifications go P1 to P5. I don't know if that's the same as when you were there, but P1 would be an attorney starting out straight from law school with 1 to 2 years of experience. We start them in the $65,000 range. P2 then is the attorneys from years 2 to 5. We have them also between the 65 and approximately $70,000 for a P2. The next is P3. Now P3 is the folks above the 5-year experience level. And that, though, once we get to P3, we kind of lose track isn't the right word, but don't put as much emphasis on years of experience. It's more of experience in the area that you are in. But our P3s, I think our top salary for P3, and I'm going to look at my chief deputy, who remembers better than me, I think is 79,000. 79. So that's anybody from 5 years up until we might move them to a P4 if they've shown us what we would like to see for a P4. So P4 then again would be over 5 years of experience, but they have shown expertise in their field. So again, as I noted, we don't focus as much on the years of experience once we move somebody to P4. Those folks are making between the 79, the top of the P3, to I think approximately 90. 93. He remembers much better than me. I always have to pull out the chart. And then P5s, right? That would be somebody that is 100% an expert in their field. Again, not focusing on years of service. Somebody that has worked in that field. We have very few P5s in our office, actually. And those then, of course, are the 93, the bottom of the P4, up to 101,000. Now we have managing attorneys. So that's our other scale. We have folks that are supervising other attorneys. We have managing attorney 1 and managing attorney 2. Those pay scales for the managing attorney are in the 90,000s, or sorry, the 85,000. The managing attorney 2 starts in the 90,000s, and we do have some of those up in the 100,000s. Obviously, our deputies are making over that.
And so,
Did I answer your question?
yeah, thank you. And the managing ones, you could be a P5 and also be a manager. I take it. It takes you up into that, to the 97 to 101 kind of.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that's correct, except we wouldn't call them the same thing. Once they're a managing attorney, we don't class them as a P5 anymore. We call them the other class.
One more question, follow-up. So, off and on, there were merit pay bonuses through the years. Have you had any of that since you've been there?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that has really gone away in terms of calling it merit pay. So when you were in the office, I was in the office, the Attorney General was Pat Crank, and he was the one that fought for and got merit pay bonuses. We don't really see those anymore. By the time I think Bruce Salzberg was the AG, he was the one that kind of wanted to normalize it with this attorney pay scale that we have in play right now. And so not really. What we do occasionally do, though, is obviously move them between the classes, but then within each class, just as the same as any other job within the state, there's a minimum, there's an MPP, and there's a maximum. And so if we find people doing really great work, and if we have the 100 series budget, which we don't necessarily always have, but assuming we would have some, we could move people a little bit of pay within their range. But it isn't the same merit pay bonuses that I think you would be remembering.
So do you have like a breakdown of the positions? I mean, how many you have at P1, P2, 3, P4, and manager?
I don't have it right in front of me. I could count it because
sorry,
I have a
you could-
sheet, but
It's
But
possible.
yes,
I mean,
it's something I can email you. I just don't have it off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may continue though, but I would think we have a reasonable mix of them right now though, given our vacancies and our ability to hire, because right now in my law office, I have 7 attorney positions open. I'm just not getting a lot of applications. We might be skewing a little lower on the P1s or P2s because I've got law students applying. Those are the people I'm able to hire. And so we might be skewing a little towards the bottom end, whereas I would prefer to have a good mix, obviously. So we have some of the P3s. Those are the folks leaving our office right now because we're not paying them as well. I would prefer to have some P3s and P4s that obviously can train up and mentor my new attorneys straight out of law school.
Thank you.
Okay, so,
We have one more question.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Representative Forrest.
I mean, I want to go back to the Colorado River, but if you still want to talk about this, I'll wait.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so you, in the narrative, you referenced 2026 as essentially the timeline. Is that optimism or is there method to that?
Mr.
Yes, please.
Chairman, Representative Schwartz, I think there was a method to that. It was the hope that we would have solutions by 2026. Do I believe that historic drought is a problem that could continue for a long time? I do. So maybe is there a hint of optimism in there? There may very well be.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just while we're on that subject, I kind of wanted to go back there as well. Why would we renegotiate the compact? Could you help those of us who are not attorneys on the road to understand that?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, one, they are time limited. And two, we've got a new historic drought. And so everybody's trying to come up with new solutions for how to deal with the drought and innovative solutions that may require renegotiation of the compact to make sure that everybody's water interest is protected. Okay, and obviously, there's a lot of complex legal questions that go along with the compact and renegotiating and protecting our rights, which is why we're so concerned about the issue and why we believe we need another attorney and some more funding to help us deal with it.
Thank you.
I think I said
Yeah,
part of it was salary. I think that's where I left off. 195,000 is salary, 102,000 is benefits. We've got 10,000 for in-state travel, 15,000 for out-of-state travel, and then 11,000 for office supplies. Again, I was rounding those to whole numbers, if that makes sense. And then the last one would be $100,000 for consulting. The consulting we're envisioning would be if there's a novel, complex legal question that we might have to hire somebody, like a very discrete one that we could hire somebody to deal with, or if we needed experts to help us along the way. That's what we were envisioning there. If there is no more questions.
Yeah, so let's just wrap that up. Is there any more questions about Colorado River Compact for now? That one doesn't mean they want to ask more later, but thank you.
Sure.
Let's keep going. And so now I think now you're down to priority 2.
Yes, priority 2 for us then is our, this is the HR position consolidation.
So, this is just the transfer over as part of the HR consolidation.
That is correct.
And so we're just if you would, if you have any comments on that, is it working okay, fairly seamlessly with the bumper 2, or are you satisfied? Generally, you're just trying to figure out if people are, how it's going.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're in transition still. So I think it's too early to tell how it's going. We're getting our needs met currently, right? I think there'll be a certain amount of transition as they sort out along the way, but currently we're getting our needs met, if that makes sense. And we're transitioning. As all transitions, you meet a few bumps along the way, but we're getting our needs met.
All right, thank you.
Okay, that brings us to priority 3 then. Priority 3 would be our computer replacement. You see these every so often from us. We're asking for $69,414. That will replace 69 computers. We did try to lower this amount by using COVID money for some. We were projected to need to replace 100 computers. We used as much COVID money as we could to replace the ones that fit appropriately under CARES. So that got us down to 69. And so we're asking for $69,000 for priority 3. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no questions on that, priority 16 then is $172,890. You'll see a corresponding one here in a minute when we get down to the medical review panel. This is what I would also call kind of a cleanup exception. If you'll recall, in the last regular session, we did away with the medical review panel as part of our budget cuts. There was a paralegal there that sits in our Casper office. She serves the whole Casper office, which is doing also some workers' comp work, Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And so her position was left in medical review panel. We'd like to transfer it up to the law office. So it's accounted for there and we can finally close out the medical review panel unit.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no questions there,
Just one quick question. Are the attorneys and all the work that goes into workers' compensation cases, are they all paid out of the general fund? Is that just the normal process?
no. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No,
The
you're fine.
answer is no. We are paid, some of them are paid out of the workers' comp fund.
Okay, and so if she's going to support workers' compensation, you've got her down all for general fund. Is that what you anticipate, or do you anticipate later on to change some of that, or at least prorate her work once she comes on?
You know, Mr. Chairman, we are currently paying her all out of the general fund, but you make a good point, and we could look at that for later to see if we could charge some to the workers' comp fund and take some off of the general fund.
All right, thank you.
We currently do pay her all out of the general fund, but you make a good point. We are taking a note as we speak. All
Very
right.
much.
That will lead you to then our next priorities. So I'm skipping the rest of the law office units really that you would see there. It will in fact bring us, because there are no exception requests there, unless anybody had questions. I'm sorry. I haven't turned to the page yet, but we're going to turn to DCI. That brings us to DCI with our fourth priority. And that chart is on page 68. And this would appear in our CJIS unit, or CJIS Criminal Justice Information Systems is where that chart is. And we have 2 exception requests. 68 starts the chart. There are narratives of a course before that. This brings us to priority 4, which is a request for $175,193. And this is for virtual environment critical equipment replacement. It's a mouthful. But what this is basically computer systems and computer hardware that are reaching the end of their useful life. So this one in particular, I'm sure you've heard us talk about this before, that DCI maintains their own servers. Those, the servers that the DCI information systems are on cannot be the same as ETS because of federal regulations requiring related to privacy, because we're interfacing with a lot of criminal databases at the federal system, and we house a lot of private information that we simply cannot put at risk of having a security breach. So the equipment that we have that runs those systems are coming to the end of their useful life. In particular for this one, we're talking about 8 physical servers that make up the foundation for running all of the computer information systems. And additionally, some switches or some storage hardware that we will need to maintain as well. And so that makes up the bulk of this request. It is, I lost track of the amount. I think I already said it, but $175,193, and that would be to replace the hardware that is coming to the end of its useful life in October of 2022. It's critical, obviously, that they may be maintained, and those systems are critical to officer safety as well as public safety, and that we have those always accessible, and we simply could not operate without them, our information systems. If there's,
Thank you. Questions?
if there's,
Keep going.
all right, if there's no questions, that brings us to 5. 5 is our regional enforcement team tech replacement. Same thing. We've got hardware coming to the end of its useful life. In this one, our regional enforcement teams are in 11 different offices, and they have firewall and checkpoint switches that need to be replaced. They reach the end of their useful life in June of 2022. Obviously, again, these are very critical to maintain the security of the information we have and the integrity of the DCI systems. And also to maintain real-time connectivity for people doing criminal investigations. That request is for $230,000.
Thank you. Question? All right, continue.
All right. That will lead us to, hang on one second. I'm sorry, I'd gone in a different order. So priority
And what,
6.
just while you're going through there and you're flipping through there in Division 300 in the internet crimes against children, just how's that going? Just give us a little update on that.
You know, Mr. Chairman, would it be okay if I asked Forrest Williams to come up and talk
course.
about that? Because he told me about it, but he can tell a much better story. During the pandemic, we did see, I mean, it's nice that we did more investigations and caught more perpetrators, but I also think during the pandemic, we had a lot more problems. But Frosty will be able to speak to that if that's okay.
We always allow you to phone a friend in this game show. Yeah. Go ahead,
Mr.
please.
Chairman, as the AG was saying during the
Go ahead and
pandemic,
identify yourself for the record and people might be listening. Please.
my apologies. Forrest Williams, I'm the interim director for the Division of Criminal Investigation.
Mhm. Yeah, please continue.
So during the pandemic, we did see not only Wyoming, but nationwide, we have seen a huge uptick in the number of ICAC related tips. Many of these tips are reported to what's called NCMEC, which is the National Center for Exploited and Missing Children. I believe, I saw these numbers just the other day. I believe they've seen an increase in the number of reported tips over 100%. And that's nationwide. Here in Wyoming, we have seen 80 to 100% increase in tips. You know, our folks that are dedicated to doing our ICAC mission, it's understandably, it's ugly information that they have to deal with and look at, to say the least. But what I'm happy to say is due to their dedication, in 2019, we saved, I believe it was 14 children. In 2020, we saved 19 children. And in 2021, we have saved, I believe the number is up to 24 children. Even though that's horrific that we have to do this, it's fantastic to be able to report that our folks are doing a great job in it.
And when you say you save children, what does that help us understand what that means?
So those are actual saves of real live victims here in Wyoming that were being perpetrated in various manners. And those children were taken into custody, protective custody along with working with
They were
Department of
being
Family.
trafficked or otherwise exploited
Yes.
and we were able to pull them out of that. I think.
Correct.
Okay, please continue.
Uh,
Sure, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you. So I just happened to be looking at your 900 series. So the Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice, is that an entity that's been helping you in that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, I believe that ties into Department of Victim Services.
Well, before we make that switch, anybody else have any questions about this particular issue for Mr. Williams? Thank you, Mr. Williams. Appreciate it. And thank you for your service. Thank you for your efforts. Go ahead. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Kara Chambers. I'm the Director of the Division of Victim Services. To address that, yes, that is an agency that works on human trafficking issues and specifically domestic child sex trafficking. And so my division has contracted with them to do a statewide survey of provider capacity so that we can help interdict more children. And we did a 2020 survey of providers, and we are developing a dashboard that we are rolling out kind of as we speak, actually. But yes, that's absolutely working with trafficking victims.
Just one other thought out of and most recently, the 19 of the 24 children, how many prosecutions came out of that? Any idea?
Mr. Chairman, some of those
Oh, don't step on the boss's toes. No, no, no.
I was stepping on his toes.
Okay. Okay.
all of those cases have been prosecuted. Some of those cases, I know one particular one, I believe had 5 defendants in it. The majority of those cases have 1 to 2 defendants.
Okay, so if we talk about 24 children, we're probably talking about we're probably talking roughly 50 criminal prosecutions out of that, right?
Mr. Chairman, that would be correct, yes.
And plus, like you said, beginning to save the kid, there's a lot of work to come back when these things happen, so thank you. Any other questions?
Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman,
Representative
just
Stitt.
to follow on to Mr. Williams. So those prosecutions, are those happening in state court by county attorneys? Or are those happening in federal court? Where are the prosecutions occurring?
Mr. Chairman,
please.
Representative Stith, both federal and in state court. Most of the cases are prosecuted in federal court, but there are certainly a number of them that are prosecuted in state court as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, continuing on. Go
All
ahead.
right.
Attorney General.
I located our 6th priority exception request, and that is in our Law Enforcement Academy budget. So the chart for that is on page 104. And that is where you'll see the 80,000. This is a request for what we're calling a job task analysis. And this is within our 900 series. And the idea here is that we would hire a consultant to complete a job task analysis for both peace officers and detention officers. And a job task analysis is a comprehensive look at what those entities do, what peace officers do and what detention officers do, so we can understand what their daily jobs are, what interactions they have with the public, what sort of credentials they should have to be hired. And then that helps us understand what we should train at the Law Enforcement Academy. And so we can better have our law enforcement officers trained to what their jobs are and to what we're seeing in the public. It's recommended that those job task analysis are done every 5 years. The last time that we did one for police officers was in 2008. So we're quite a bit behind on police officers. And the last time we did one for detention officers was 2015. So we're a little bit behind there, but this will help us understand if we need to change our training, if we need to do different things to make sure that our law enforcement officers are prepared for the jobs that they are going to encounter. And as I noted, this is 80,000, and this would allow us to hire a consultant. And I would just add that I think it's critical to do that at this time, especially given the climate and increased scrutiny that we're finding on law enforcement altogether. And it would just make sure that we're consistent with practices throughout the nation, but then also locally, because our local folks are doing things different or have different tasks that they accomplish more that are separate from what the national level is doing.
Thank you. Continue. Thank you.
All right, our next priority request is priority number 7. That is in our post unit, which is Peace Officer Standing and Training. That appears on page 132. And we have a couple of requests within this unit. The first one is priority number 7, since we're going numerically. And the request here would be to allow us to increase our costs for administrative hearings, or to cover the costs that we are seeing with increased administrative hearings. As you know, POST is the entity that certifies peace officers and takes care of investigations as to whether folks should still be certified and whether there is discipline to have with a peace officer certification. We have seen tremendous, so they would investigate complaints about peace officers or law enforcement officers and see if there is discipline to be had within their certification. And we are seeing a tremendous increase in the calls for investigations that are sent to post. And then if during the investigation, we find an infraction of post rules, we are required to offer the peace officer a contested case that offers them due process, obviously, for their certification. Over time, we have seen an increase. In 2020, we saw an increase of 175% of the investigations over 2019. And in 2021, we've seen an additional increase of 14% over the 2020 number. And so those continue to increase. And with that, the costs to use the hearing officers at OAH have increased. And so we're requesting $55,000 to cover those increased costs.
Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Schwartz, did you have something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm starting to feel like Representative Summers. 175%, what are the actual numbers? Do you have that?
Go ahead.
Yes, we do. Mr. Chairman, if we can allow Chris Walsh, the Director of Post, to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chris Walsh. I'm the Director of Peace Officer Standard and Training Commission.
Good to see you again, Chris.
Good to see you too.
In a few years.
A lot of old familiar faces. Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, to give you the numbers, in 2019, there were 11 cases. In 2020, there were 33, and we're at 33 year to date now.
Thank you, Chris.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Ginsky.
Mr. Walsh should be uniquely positioned to answer this question. I was unfamiliar with this post process. Does this take the place of civil service at the city or the sheriff's office level, or is this duplicative, or could they do this instead of their own civil service hearings?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, they are independent of one another. So the civil service rules that would fall under the communities that abide by those would be guided by their hiring and by their separation process or termination process. This, our hearings and my role is their statewide certification. So an officer for misconduct could be separated, terminated from an organization and still be eligible to be a peace officer within the state. My role comes in and takes away that statewide certification.
Thank you. Other questions? Thank you. All right, continue.
All right, Mr. Chairman, that brings us to priority number 8, which is also within the post unit. This one was not recommended by the governor, so I just want to note that the governor did not recommend it.
On what page are you on?
We're still within the same chart,
Oh, it's just.
which is on 132. You'll see it down there on the state exam fee towards the bottom, the 26,000.
Right.
So what we were trying to do here was trying to account for the fact that the funding we received from the state exam fee, if you'll recall, we offer an entry-level test that people could pay for themselves if they wanted to join a law enforcement agency. And they could pay for that test before going to basic training. And then we use the fee from that test to pay for certain things within our budget, mostly our systems to administer that test. So what had happened over time, that test is not mandated. Nobody's required to take that test. And what we're seeing over time is a lot less interest in that test. And so we don't have the revenue we needed to pay for those 200 series costs. And so what we were trying to do here was move it from the state exam fee, the 26,000, to the general fund. The governor did not recommend that, but that's what we were trying to do with that request. Paid largely for, like I said, 200 series fees.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead,
Thank
Representative
you,
Walters.
Mr. Chairman, you indicated in your narrative on that, from 2019 to 2020, there was a 45% decrease in the number of applicants. Was that trend line seen from, say, 2015, 16, 17, 18, as those are more fair years? Were you seeing a significant decline year over year in the preceding years? Because 2019 to 2020, we all know 2020 was a real odd year in all factors of life. So that would be kind of a unique set of comparisons using 2020 as your data set instead of a trend line from previous years and eliminating 2020.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, fair point, but it was decreasing before that too. We were seeing a lot less interest in that test. So you're right, those would have been anomaly years, but we were seeing a lot less interest in that test. It's a little bit outdated. It's a paper test. We just weren't seeing people take advantage of it as much.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative Stiff.
just a follow-up question. So you're still getting some revenue from exam fees, even though the volume's lower. Under this proposal, what happens to those exam fees? Where does the money go?
Good.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, you mean, well, okay, I see what you're asking. I'm sorry. If it was granted, we would have still used those to cover as much as we could of those costs. And then obviously that would leave some in the general fund that we wouldn't have had to use and would have reverted to the general fund over time. So the amount that we had estimated we were going to get was around $8,000. Again, I'm rounding those numbers. We would have used that first to pay for the costs, the 200 series costs, and then possibly reverting some to the general fund had it been granted. Now it's not recommended by the governor, assuming you follow his recommendation. We'll use the $8,000 and then try to cobble together funding from other places if we have savings in other budget lines.
Go ahead. Thank you. Continue.
All right, that brings us then to, that was 8. That will bring us to 9, which is also within this budget, but this is a cleanup, what I would consider also a cleanup a cleanup exception request. And we're just asking you to eliminate some spending authority that we had within this unit. Traditionally, we had received a federal grant as a pass-through from YDOT in the amount of $50,000, and that was used to fund our training software. That grant has been discontinued, so we obviously no longer require the spending authority to use that grant. And so this is a reduction of $50,000.
Okay, thank you.
That will bring us then to 10. And for 10, we're going to have to backtrack a little bit to,
Page 81.
yes, page 81. Thank you.
I had my finger there because you skipped over it.
Yes, page 81. So this brings us back to within the DCI unit. And these ones are what I would consider also cleanup exception requests. This one is, let me just get there. This one is the DNA Enhancement Program. And this is a federal grant that we have received. Let me just get to the right page here for me. So this is the DNA Enhancement Program. This is $900,000 that we're asking for. As I said, this is a cleanup. Historically, we've been awarded the spending authority for this grant through the NAFR and B11 process. And we're now just requesting that the spending authority be put into a standard budget so we can do away with that NAFR and B11 process. We have been receiving this grant since 2007, so it's been around for a long time. So we thought this would increase transparency to let people know how we're funded. And we also thought that it would reduce administrative work and hassle in terms of NAFR and B11 process. And so this grant is seeking to increase the capacity of publicly funded forensic and databasing work in DNA labs, which would allow us to process more DNA samples. And we use that on casework, we use it on supplies, we use it on equipment. And so that is 10. It's nothing, oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
No, go
Chairman.
ahead, finish.
I was going to say, it's nothing different than what we're doing. It would simply be making it a standard budget.
So, and just for informational purposes, so, I mean, there, in the past, I think there's been some backlogs on drug tests, DNA tests, and also background checks. So give us an update on where we're at on backlogs themselves.
Mr. Chairman, again, I can allow, if you would, Mr. Williams to address that. We're doing a little bit, I don't mean to steal his thunder, but we're doing a little better on our backlogs in the lab.
Good.
I did steal your thunder. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, in some areas, we are doing better. Yes.
A little better.
Specifically, you asked about background checks. When it comes to background checks, right now, we're down to about 7 working days to about a week. I believe maybe the last time I testified to you folks, we were roughly at 3 to 4 weeks. We're down to about a week. We're hopeful that will maintain. One area of concern there is the Gaming Commission is going to fairly soon. We've been given a heads up by the Gaming Commission that we are going to start processing background checks for them. And we don't know an exact number yet, but it could be anywhere from 600 to 800. And obviously
800
that
over what period of time? Just initially?
initially, and then on an annual basis, I don't know yet how many of those need to be done, if it's annually or what. But that could have, obviously that will have an impact on us, yes.
Okay.
Turnaround time in the lab, where we are, we've made a lot of improvement when it comes to our toxicology result turnaround. We are meeting all of our deadlines, our court deadlines, et cetera. But we are struggling in our chemistry unit right now.
In which unit?
Our chemistry unit,
Okay.
drug identification unit. But as I said, we are meeting our deadlines, and there's a number of reasons why we are struggling, but I think in time that's going to even itself out.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, then that would bring us to priority number 11. This is the same sort of thing you'll hear from me, cleaning up the NAFR B11 process. Number 11 is the Paul Coverdell grant, $719,020. We have been, same thing, receiving this grant since 2007. This one seeks to improve the quality and turnaround time of forensic analysis of evidence. And so we would again like to put this in a standard budget item. I'm sorry, I
85.
did forget to say the page, 85. If no questions, that would move us then to priority number 12.
Well, say 80, 89, or 88,
Yes.
excuse me.
Yes, and this is the Adam Walsh grant. This one is $715,000. We've been receiving this grant since 2011, and this is to assist with our ongoing requirements under the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act of 2006. Mostly we use that for sex offender registration and notification act. And so we use it to purchase supplies, contract costs, equipment, and enhancing the collection and storage of biometric data. So that's DNA, fingerprints, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
That
You?
would lead us to priority 13, which is on page 91. This is the N-CHIP grant, $700,000, same thing, what I'm calling a cleanup exception request. We've been receiving this one since 2011. The purpose of this grant is to help reduce violent crime and address gun violence by improving criminal history records and the accessibility of criminal history records.
This is
And
related to the background checks on purchasing firearms mostly.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct, yes.
Okay.
There's no questions. That leads us to 14, which is on page 94. This is the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security Information Liaison Officer. We had received some pass-through funding from Homeland Security that allowed us to run the Information Liaison Officer Program. It's in the amount of $50,000. Same thing, this was being accomplished through the B11 process. What this program does, it expands the training and the help for people to understand how to better gather information and share that information amongst our state agencies and our law enforcement agencies. We use this primarily to pay travel expenses for classes. And this was $50,000.
And looking at that, so that's the Wyoming Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security. And then when I look here and it talks about established to achieve the National Fusion Center assessment standards, does that have to do with this transportation issues related to the term, I guess, is transuranic. It's the nuclear fish, it's the fissile elements, it's the nuclear waste and other stuff like that that gets transported to the state. Is that what that's related to? Or is it something else? Or is it security issues related to that? Or why is it, what is it with the National Fusion Center assessment standards?
Mr. Chairman, if you'll allow Director Williams to answer, he's going to answer much better than I.
Mr. Chairman, in this narrative, when we talk about the National Fusion Centers standards, what we're referring to are the fusion centers that were created, which are intelligence information sharing centers created after specifically 9/11.
Thank you. Sure, Senator Drew.
Just a general question. So we move these, and I understand the point, take it out of the B11 process and put it in the general budget. And we've been getting all these grants for years, but we just whipped through a couple, $2-3 million worth of dollars here. So the grants end, and now it's in the standard budget. All right.
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Thank you.
It would just be to put it in the standard budget if I understood.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, then that brings us to 15, which I talked about with 16 up in the law office. So this is the moving the paralegal position.
Right, this is the other half of the one.
This is the other half. So that's down in our medical review panel unit, which hopefully will go away if this happens. So that was on page 136, but it's the corresponding move of our paralegal position. All right, if there's no further questions on our exception requests, the only thing I would add is I know you spoke a lot about compensation today with A&I in terms of our budget. Obviously, we're very supportive of the efforts to raise compensation within the whole state. We, as I think you heard her say, attorneys have been hit hard, not necessarily our entry-level attorneys, but we're significantly behind market for anybody above our entry-level attorneys. And as I mentioned, we sit with 7 open attorney positions right now, which make it really hard to operate. But it's not just the law office. When I think about compensation, Chuck's face comes to my mind a lot. This would be true for everybody, but what Chuck's doing up at the Law Enforcement Academy is tremendous. That's in Douglas, which, it's hard to hire folks there, but we need to hire housekeepers. We need to hire food servers, and they're making a lot more at private entities than they are up there. So it's hard for him to keep folks too. So So if I can just add my voice as support for anything you can do for compensation, we sure would appreciate it, because recruiting and retaining folks in our agency has become a significant concern for us.
Mr. Coach.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
So with the assuming that that governor's recommendation is adopted and passes both bodies, what happens to those numbers? That what is the benefit to your P2, P3, P4, P5, and manager?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. So actually, if you look at their charts that they've offered, it doesn't offer significant relief to P1s. They're making market. It offers a minimal amount of relief to P2s. But after that, we see it offers significant relief to P3s, 4s, and 5s in terms of getting them closer to market. Now, as you undoubtedly heard from the A&I director, and I wasn't able to hear that, but my understanding of the plan was just to move those to minimum, the pay tables, right, to minimum. None of our folks really right now are making MPP either, but moving them to minimum gets them closer to the market rate. And so it allows me the flexibility to offer people a better salary and hopefully attract them. There's been positions that I have offered that relate to some of my vacancies where I just can't attract folks because I don't pay them enough. They turn me down on salary. And that's happened more than once in my agency. So it just would allow me the ability to offer a salary closer to market.
Yeah, well, could you just provide us with a kind of a breakdown of those numbers you gave us earlier? And then what the impact would be if under this current payment plan to those positions? So just so we can see the ranges.
Sure.
And what improvements it is and how much it is.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, yes, I'd be happy to get you that information.
Great.
That would certainly be easy enough for us to do.
You know, on that point, it just occurred to me as you went through an earlier discussion about P1 through P5, and you went through that, it seemed to me, it just struck me that you also have a compression issue in that. And so have you looked at if the governor's plan is adopted, if that proposal is adopted and goes through, does that assist in the compression? It seems to me, namely it will, if we're actually kind of giving percentages, because the amounts of difference is going to help spread that a little bit. But just what were your thoughts about wage compression and what you're seeing? And it's not just going to be there, it's going to be other places in your office as well.
You know, Mr. Chairman, when I thought about it, what I thought was, first, it would be great to have the flexibility to do that. I am in a little bit, I don't know if better's the word, but better circumstance in terms of dealing with compression within the attorney pay plan and how I can flex a little in terms of the amount that I pay those folks. And so as long as I have the 100 series money. And so I was hoping if we got the money and the pay plan got approved, that I could deal with those sort of issues within my own budget and the 100 series. But I think you'll see that I could deal with them somewhat within my own budget and the way that I handle paying folks. But that problem will still exist, I guess I would say. I was hoping to have the flexibility first and then maybe do some more analysis on compression later.
Well, yeah, and I mean, as you talk about it, and just anecdotally, is if you're not having so much trouble with the entry because it's closer to market, but as you move up through that, I think that's where compression, it leads to employee dissatisfaction. And, you know, for obviously, I mean, I'm 100% expert in my field and I'm only making 10 or 15 more than an entry-level guy or gal. That gets to be a tough pill to swallow after a while.
Right. And Mr. Chairman, when I say deal with it myself, what I had envisioned was, you know, obviously there's the minimum, there's the MPP, and there's the maximum. And so to help deal with that, you maybe pay your entry levels to create bigger gap, right? You pay your entry levels at the minimum, whereas if you could, assuming you had the 100 series budget, you pay your 4s or 5s closer to the maximum to create that space as well. And that's what I meant when I said deal with it myself within my attorney pay plan. It's not going to 100% fix the problem, but it helps the problem. But you're exactly right. Some of the folks I lose are because of that. They've been long-term, longish term employees, and they leave even for administrative jobs somewhere else within state government, or they go to the judicial branch because they can make more with that experience, even within our own state government, or they leave for private sector jobs because of that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on this discussion, as I read your vacancy list and the agency comments, in many of these positions, you received only a limited number of applicants, or only a single applicant, or a limited number and only a single or maybe 2 of the applicants were even qualified. When you post a position, are you posting what that salary range will be so they're scared off before they apply? Or is there just a limited number of folks willing to live in Cheyenne wanting to do the work in the areas that you're posting for? Because it seemed to me you'd have a great pool until you offered them the job, and then they'd realize it was a low paying position if salary is the sole factor. But if you're only receiving 3 or 2 or 4 applicants, or 0 applicants in one situation that you had to repost based on your comments here, something else is going on. It would, or I read it to be there's something else occurring, and so a little more discussion on that would be great.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, you make a great point. We do post a little, we don't post the top range because we don't have very many P5s, and we wouldn't hire in somebody at a P5. I would want to assess what their work was and what their expertise was. So we wouldn't post at a P5, so that top salary we're not posting, but we might post up to a P4 to try to generate the interest that you note. That still is pretty low when we list the level of experience that we're looking for related to that particular job. So let's say I would have, well, the one, if I get my exception request that I'm going to post here, that I want a P4 for, I will post that level of experience and then post the range. But when they correlate that level of experience with the salary I have to offer, they would see that is low. So I think that one is scaring some folks off. But do I think your point is well taken that there's other things going on here? I think so. And I think it's related to the knowledge that there's not a lot of room for advancement right now within the state because of salary in terms of moving up. I can move them to a P4, but there's not a lot of salary to go with that. So I think it's some of those things, the knowledge that that's not available to folks here. I have limited number of supervisor or managing positions. And so that might play into why I'm getting different, less than a lot of applications, I guess. One thing I think, and this is just a Bridget theory, I have no science to back this up, but I actually think the significant attention that came to the budget woes that the state experienced in 2020 actually did scare a lot of folks off from applying. They believed there would be significant cuts in force, right? This was right during the pandemic. They believed people were taking furloughs. They believed that we might actually have to cut salaries. And so I actually think that scared some folks away too, that there was some belief that we were in a real financial pickle, and we were, right? And that there would be no recovery from that. And so I think that helped to, or contributed, not helped, but contributed to our woes in the applications that we're receiving.
Bridget, I'm curious, how many of your attorneys are UW law graduates? Do you know?
Wow, Mr. Co-Chairman, I don't know that I've ever counted that up, but I would submit to you a significant portion. I could count it if you want and just,
I'm just curious.
I would say a significant portion. There was a time when we were getting a lot of folks that weren't UW graduates. That was a little before my time, but I would submit to you a significant portion are UW graduates. I've never done the actual calculation.
Okay. Further questions? Anything else?
I just wanted to circle back to the thing I said I would talk about last if we're all done with budget information. You, Chairman Perkins had asked for some updates on our lawsuits. I don't have a lot that haven't been shared in the media, but I would just reiterate what those are.
Sure, go ahead.
So we filed 3 lawsuits challenging vaccine mandates. We did those in 3 separate lawsuits. So one challenging the OSHA vaccine mandate. That one has received a preliminary injunction or a stay, if you want to call it, out of the 5th Circuit. That was a nationwide stay, so that would not apply to anybody in Wyoming.
5th Circuit is in Mississippi? Or
5th Circuit, yes, Louisiana, that area. Now, what happened in the OSHA case was so many different coalitions or so many different folks filed all over. They did what they call a circuit lottery. And that actually looks kind of like a bingo drum, I think, and they just pull a number out. It's quite interesting. But that one got transferred. So everybody who had filed a suit, and we had filed ours in the 6th, got transferred to the 8th Circuit. So that's all being handled within the 8th Circuit there. We obviously will keep up with filings and file as the court asks us to do, but currently there's a stay in that one. So our second suit would be the vaccine mandate related to CMS. So that's your Medicare and Medicaid. And that was the one that was going to require health workers to get vaccinated and anybody working in those types of facilities that received that type of funding. We filed that one also in the 6th Circuit with our coalition. We did receive a stay or a preliminary injunction in that one as well. And so that preliminary injunction only applied to the states that had filed there. So there were 10 of us. Obviously, Wyoming was one. Since then, we've seen a nationwide stay come out of the 5th Circuit, again, Louisiana. So there will be challenges. The federal government has asked for immediate appeal of ours, asking the court to overturn the preliminary injunction. We're very hopeful in that case. I don't want to jinx anything, but we're hopeful that that would stay in place until they're able to consider it on the merits. The last one then would be the vaccine mandate for federal contractors. Again, we filed with our coalition in the 6th Circuit. We have not heard anything from the court on that yet, but briefing is complete. So we are expecting or hoping for a ruling soon. And it does seem to be that the court is indicating that they would try to hurry. And that's reading the tea leaves a little bit there.
Are they all essentially the same argument?
You know, they really are. There's slight differences, obviously, based on what they did and APA differences for each one. But generally, the top argument are in my mind, or the one that speaks to our Wyoming heart and the things we believe in Wyoming is you've exceeded your authority. You had no authority to do this. And you will see that in all of the arguments. Congress didn't give you authority to do this. You didn't have it otherwise. And so there's an element of that in all 3. But we're hoping for the last one soon. And I would just note a different coalition out of Kentucky did get an injunction in there. So that would have been Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio. And we're hoping our court follows soon. But that only applied to those 3 states.
Great. Any questions on that? Okay. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think so unless you have any questions for me. I didn't let Shannon come up ever, so I want to note Shannon is here. Just wave to the folks, Shannon, from the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, obviously doing a tremendous job, but she did not have any exception requests, and so
Okay, great.
she did not come up.
Well, it looks
today.
like we are about done then. Good
And on
timing.
time.
Thanks a lot, Bridget. We appreciate.
Thank
your
you, and
presenting
thank
and
you
coming
for
early.
hearing us today. We'll get you the information that we promised you.
Great, thank you.